This reminds me of a story. One of my coworkers from Walker had told me he knew a woman who had a child, and the child was born with Down syndrome. And at first, the woman was crushed. But then after a while, she developed a very strong love for this child. And so she and her husband had another child, and this child too had Down syndrome, so she now had two of her children with Down syndrome. And someone was asking her about it, and they said, well, isn't that really hard? Isn't it difficult? She said, I would have it no other way, because they are such a blessing to me. That's just who they are, brings the love of God in my heart all the time. And I see that. We see this man born blind, and we often think, oh, that poor boy, or that man or woman. And yet we don't see past that sometimes, that people are a blessing no matter what they have. It may not be necessarily blindness. It may be a person who is deaf. It may be a person who can't walk. It may be a person with a disease that disables them in some way or shape or form. Or it may be something within ourselves. We may be arrogant, envious. We may have feelings of inadequacy. We may have feelings that keep us from being the people who we are. And in a way, that's blindness too. And so Jesus is telling this man, and he's telling the Pharisees, that it wasn't necessarily a sin that he did or his parents did. But it's just sometimes the way things are. And yet, God is able to work through all of that for us. You know, and the Pharisees claim to have all the answers. They claim to be able to see, and yet Jesus tells them, you really don't see. You're a little blind to what's really happening here. They claim to be believers in Moses and believe that God talked to Moses, and yet this man Jesus, who was the Son of Man, the Son of God, they won't believe that he talks to God, or that he's a child of God, or he is God. It's interesting how people's ways can be closed, their minds can be closed, how we can be blind to things. The man gives them the cold hard facts. This is what happened. And that's all they want to know, is how did he do this? And yet they don't look at the reasons why Jesus did this for this man, for the people around them that had other things happening, the lepers and the people who were lame, or those who were deep in their sin, or what have you. They didn't ask why God was working the way God was working. They're blind to the ways of God in a lot of ways. They're trying to preserve their power. They're neck deep into their own theology about themselves and ignorant of any other possibilities that might come along the way. The man is nameless. They don't give him a name, and yet he is a strong witness to the workings of Jesus, of who Jesus is and was. And for us to be stubborn enough not to accept, not to realize that God is working in our lives, that we're being affected in certain ways. We tend to fill our cups up and aren't able to have anything left for something new. This outbreak of coronavirus is going around the world. It closes doors, literally in some cases where people are self-isolating. But it opens other ones too. We're able to think of new ways of doing ministry, of conveying a worship service to an empty sanctuary, but a sanctuary that's full of church people in your homes or wherever you are. You remember in Revelations that I will bring a new earth, a new Jerusalem, a new earth, and make all things new. And Jesus is telling his disciples, he's telling his Pharisees, be prepared for the new. It's coming. It's here among you. Have hearts to be open. Have eyes to see. For those who are blind, those who think they see, Jesus will make blind so that they can see where they're blind and why they're blind. And to give thanks for God who gives, and gives generously and abundantly in our lives. The Pharisees are us too. We tend to focus on the wrong questions, the hows, but not the whys, or why God is up to what God is doing. And oftentimes it's a mystery you don't know. And we have faith enough to trust that God is in the midst of all this, that God is helping and doing what God can through people to make things a better place. That God is in the midst of this virus that's going around and in different ways, whether it's closing stores and yet paying employees, or making things available for curbside pickup, or delivering medications, or what have you. We find the world is trying to adapt and make a difference in a meaningful way. And as a man of faith, as a person of faith, I have to believe that God's behind all this, trying to make it possible for us to continue in our lives, to help those we can, and to wait for things to get better, to things to subside, and to come back to normalcy, and yet have a flavor of this sense of a deeper community and generosity and family that this is causing us, or a slowing down of life enough to pause in this Lenten season to be present to God as well as let God be present to us. In all these things, God is with us. Thanks be for God. Thanks be to God. Amen.